There is something that I would really like to talk about at some point, and that's poetry. It's something that I genuinely enjoy. French, English, Russian, but there is a problem that I thought of when I first had the idea of talking about it, and that's the difference between poetry and regular books. It's easy to talk in the way I want to make these recordings about a book. I can interpret and I can portray the story with my own words. But it's just impossible with poems. Like how do I actually talk about them? How do I break them down without just reading them out loud? I am in no way, shape or form one of the people that try to completely analyze the poem. I'm not pretending that I understand them or that I can somehow see some hidden meanings underneath or what the author exactly wanted to say with each verse. I just try my best to enjoy them, and the bigger impression they leave on me, the more likely I am to remember or go back to them. And talking about poetry will definitely be a great challenge for me in a different sense than talking about working out, training, a martial art, and the way I eat without getting into the negative stuff or breaking the rules I've set up for myself. So on one hand I'm looking forward to it, on the other one I am still unsure how I'm going to approach that, and I'll definitely have to think about it more. But on the other hand, that's for the future me because I still have like two or three themes that I would like to tackle before getting into poetry. So I'm safe for now. And there is one thing that's connected loosely to this issue, and that's how am I going to talk about, let's say, controversial movies, for example, Tropic Thunder or Dodgeball, which are one of the very few movies and TV media in general that I genuinely enjoy and like, and I would like to talk about them, but it would probably not go very well with YouTube and the ecosystem of the internet of today. So that will be another, maybe not a challenge, but straight up a skip, which is unfortunate, but that's just how things currently are. Next thing, it's Asterix again, this time in Switzerland. And this one is actually slightly different. There is a undertone that the previous volumes did not really have. It's just a tiny little bit darker than the rest of the volumes. There are some that have something, some aspects to it that are also just a tad bit darker than the usual themes, but it's in no way interrupting or lowering the quality of the story. Just a small preface. And we are beginning in our village where the chieftain just fired his two shield bearers, and there is a great dialogue where the two gulls are complaining that the chef is being whimsical because he just complimented the great weather they are having that day, and the shield bearers with the shield on their shoulders where the chieftain was standing on, they wanted to check out the great weather, so they leaned back and wanted to see. And when they straightened up, the chieftain was no longer on the shield and quite angry for obvious reasons. So the chief comes to Asterix and Obelix and appoints them his new shield bearers. Unfortunately, he did not really think things through because of the huge height difference between Asterix and Obelix. He is quite tilted when he is being carried by the two of them, and thus, after a short argument, only Obelix is carrying the chieftain as if he is serving a drink on a plate with one hand. Now we move to a governor's place in Rennes, where a traditional Roman decadence is displayed by the governor organizing a proper orgies where way less light-hearted fun appears, and they are just desperately trying to enjoy themselves with overabundance of food and makeup and drinks and dancing, and yet it's not exactly satisfactory. The governor is interrupted by his tax collector, who brings him a huge sack of gold. He proceeds to pour almost his entire content into his personal chest, and then he gives some to the collector and leaves almost nothing to the Rome, where obviously most of the payment should go to. Then the orgy continues, and is only interrupted in the morning by a quester from Rome who came to inspect the taxes. He is then served a vegetable soup by the governor, who would obviously like to get rid of the quester so that he can't figure out that he's been stealing the tax money. And so, in a great scene where he opens up his rings, many rings on each finger, with false jewels that are empty and in the normal case would be a container for poison. He finds the first few empty, and only the last one is still full of some poisonous substance, and he reminds himself that he needs to refill them properly. Then at night the governor is interrupted by one of his servants that the quester is ill, and his response is, "What, already?" Then the governor sends some quacks to pretend that they are actually trying to cure the quester, but he sends them away under a pretext and then sends his trusted soldier to find a Gaul druid to attempt to cure him. The soldier finds Panoramix, and kind druid he is. He obviously immediately decides to go on the journey to try and cure the quester. He calls Asterix and Obelix, but Obelix is still being the shield bearer, which he immediately abandons, and the poor chieftain ends up on the ground. The Gauls reach the ill quester and are interrupted by the governor, who heard about a druid coming for the rescue, and obviously he is not happy with that, so he attempts to rally his guards, but unfortunately even the guards are pertaining in orgies, displaying the like master, like servants. They get beaten, and when Panoramix is doing his job, Obelix comes to him with one of the guards he just beaten and asks him if he could check him up, because the guard doesn't seem to be feeling very well after he was promptly dispatched by Obelix. The druid immediately recognizes that the quester has been poisoned, and he knows the way to cure him, but he puts up a condition that the quester will stay at their village as a hostage, just to make sure that there will be no more attempts at his life. Now the Gauls and the governor's loyal dogs are both sent to now Switzerland to find a cure, and on the other hand to attempt a disruption of the Gauls' plans. In Switzerland, in the governor's mansion, there is a orgy ongoing, but this time with melted cheese or fondue, and they are having fun by having special rules in dipping their bread into the fonda, and that's a punishment game. Fortunately for the governor, the Swiss are quite heavy on order and cleanliness, so they are disrupting his orgy by cleaning both the floors and the whips and paddles that are used in the punishment game, which he finds infuriating. The governor is then informed by the tax collector from the previous one about the Gauls coming over and trying to cure the quester. The Gauls are caught by a border patrol between Helvetia and Gaul, and the officer tries to interrogate them, find faults with them, and when they finally lose their patience, Asterix decides to show the officer how exactly the potion works that he carries with him, and he shows it in a very clear way by sending him into the stratosphere. Meanwhile, the other three soldiers that were with them promptly crossed the border back to Gallia and are now commenting that Helvetia seems to have some problems while the Gauls are beating up the officer and the other soldiers. The Gauls escape through a lake where one of the participants in the orgy is currently paying for dropping his breath by being thrown into that lake with weights. Then they find refuge in an inn, but fortunately Romans are on their tracks, so the innkeeper decides to help them. Here the authors take a poke at the famous Swiss punctuality, where the innkeeper makes a alarm sound for all the guests in the inn to turn the hourglass next to their bed, which one of the inn's guests comments on with quite distaste. Then they have to hide in a bank where the banker locks them up in a safe for the night, and after escaping and climbing a giant mountain, Asterix finally is able to obtain the silver star, the flower needed for the Panoramix's potion. With the flower safely in their hands, they manage to come back to the village in time, and after the quester is cured by the antidote and a healthy dose of the strengthening potion, he goes on to strengthen up the foul governor by his fists, and then he is going to check his accountings and then send him to circus, which back then wasn't nearly as much fun as the circus we know in our time. And then for the first time, a Roman is present during the ending banquet that always happens after Asterix and Obelix come back from their adventures. And that's the end of the Asterix in Switzerland volume.